manager for the drainage districts. Again, I would reiterate what Karen said. Thank you all for attending, and especially virtually. I think it has been really interesting for us to kind of modify this process for the virtual platform. The drainage districts were created in 1917, and these landowner meetings, the requirements, the process for elections was all created at that time. And so it always has been interesting to modify that into like our modern structure. And then this year having to put it in a virtual format has put like a whole new spin on things. So we appreciate everyone's patience and their time and their attention. If you've attended a meeting like this before, you probably know that in order to hold an official landowner meeting, we need to have 50% of the voting acres represented. And so at this time, we have about 45%, which sounds close, but we're about 500 acres short. So we won't be making quorum tonight. That just means that we will not be able to hold elections for the board, and we will not be able to approve last year's meeting minutes. There is another landowner meeting scheduled for the regular time of the year for March in 2021. And so that's when I'd expect you all to have an official landowner meeting, and I would expect we'd be able to take care of the rest of this business at that time. So how this works in practice, since we are not able to have an official meeting tonight, those two seats that are up tonight will be up for election again at the next landowner meeting in March. Does anyone have any questions about that process? I know, like I said, it's a pretty archaic, like the way that it's run, and especially putting it into this context makes it different. Is there anyone that has any questions about how this works, or voting acres or quorum or an official meeting or anything else? So we'll go ahead and just move into our staff presentations portion of the meeting, and then at the end there'll be time for questions related to those presentations. So Karen, go on ahead.
Thank you, Emily. And first up on our agenda tonight is a district financial update from Janet Olson.
Hi. For the you that have never met me before, I'm Janet Olson. I'm the MCDD Finance Manager. Next slide. Thank you. This is for the 2018-19 financial review. The audited financial report was completed by James Marta and Company. We used the accrual method in accordance with GAAP standards. The district received a clean financial audit free of any material misstatements. And if you'd like to obtain a copy of the district's audited financial report, you can either contact me at my email address, or you can always go onto our website and visit the document library. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. We're going to move on to our next presentation for tonight, which is the district operations update with Bill Owen. Bill?
Good evening, all. My name is Bill Owen. I'm one of the deputy directors here, along as the chief engineer. And I have 4 slides to share with you this evening to talk about what type of work the district staff have been doing on your behalf regarding its drainage and levee systems. So we're going to, next slide, please. So I'm going to start off with the internal drainage system. 3 images to share with you this evening. The first on the left-hand side shows work being done to install pump number 5 in our pump station number 1. This is part of a project that is the biggest the district has undertaken in approximately 2 decades. It's about just over $4 million, and it's replaced 3 of the 5 pumps that are really the workhorses of this pump station at the very bottom of the MCDD drainage system. So this is a highly important pump station, and the pumps that were in there that were dated in the 1940s finally gave out. And so now we have an opportunity to replace them with some modern pumps that can provide more power and run more efficiently. We have just under $500,000 of rebates from the Energy Trust of Oregon that we received as part of this project. Looking at the top right image, shows 3 of our crew members standing on top of a water tower in Camas, Washington, which may seem odd to some, but this is the highest point in our region and is a site where several utilities use to install repeaters for their radio systems to communicate from remote stations back to their main headquarters. We're now doing the same. We just upgraded our communication system for our pump stations and our in-stream monitors to our licensed radio frequency system. And so we're going to have much more stable and reliable communications during storm events, which is the key for our work. The bottom right represents an image of our staff installing new trash rakes at pump station 1, the same pump station where the new pumps are located. This is just under $1 million project to replace an existing system that's about 20 years old and had become very onerous on our maintenance side to keep active. So we have a new system bringing in and should reduce our maintenance costs moving forward. Next slide, please. So moving on to the levee management side of our house, 3 images again to share with you. First on the left shows our crews installing some slope stability measures as we construct a new ramp that allows us to get to lower portions of the levee system along Marine Drive. This one happens to be close to 122nd Avenue and Marine Drive. So we finished up that project this year. The top right shows an example of some tow drain that were once buried but had been installed decades before. And so we're starting to recover them and allowing water that does seep through the levee during high water events to come out of these pipes and drain properly. So we're starting that process and moving forward this year and next with there. The bottom right represents, looks like just a green mass, and that's really what it is. It's a lot of aquatic vegetation that accumulates right next to our 142nd cross levee. This is a view from inside the cab of our excavator as we try to clean out the debris that's accumulated and blocks flow getting through that cross levee. So this is an example of the type of work we do to make sure the water continues to move forward. Wanted to give you a sense on the amount of development that's going on in your district. We have been working on approximately 65 different development projects that have gone through the City of Portland and City of Fairview and Gresham systems. 36 of those have been closed out from our vantage point, which is shown in the red dots, and the remaining 29 and the green dots are still active. One project to highlight is the photo that you see in the top right. So this is a project that the City of Portland, a couple of bureaus within the city have finished just recently to extend the bike path and improve the bike path along Marine Drive. This image happens to be next to our pump station 4, so it's on MCDD property, and so our staff had to work with the city to make sure their designs were acceptable, so it allows the levee to continue to function as it's supposed to and allow us to continue maintaining that system. So that process was completed and they finished construction not too long ago. Next slide, please. So finally, let me say just a couple of things about what's going on in the next year. The top left image shows a drone aerial view of the MCDD campus This image is shown in part to give you an idea that the improvements that we're going to be making on the internal water distribution system on campus. There's a new water line that's going to be coming in from the top left of that image and then coming into the rest of the campus where those buildings are. Going clockwise over to the top right is an image of the gravity flow outfalls. These are outfalls right next to our office, main office, and it allows some redundancy in our drainage system. So in case something happens to pump station 1, we still have the opportunity to allow water to drain in MCDD into the lower slough and then onto the Willamette and the Columbia rivers. So there's a need to rehabilitate some of the features of these outfall systems. There are 5, 60-inch pipes that are part of that system. So they're pretty good size. And so we have some work going on to start that up. The bottom right represents a scenario where the Army Corps of Engineers goes out and conducts inspections of our levee system every 5 years. They're called periodic inspections. This is a fairly thorough investigation on their end to make sure that their original federal investments is still being maintained properly. And so this year is one of the years that those inspections happen. So we look forward to that happening in December and January of this year. So we'll probably be wearing that same type of outfit with some warm clothes again. The bottom left is the last project I'll make, and that's a project related to what we indirectly call a straw pipe, which connects the water from the McBride Slough on the upper end of the arrow, the starting point of the yellow arrow, and then drains to the Columbia Slough at the very point of the arrow. This is just over $1 million project that several participants are going to be contributing to in addition to MCDD. So that project should start design this year. And with that, I believe my slides are done unless there are any questions. All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Bill. And we're going to move on to our next presentation on the Army Corps of Engineers feasibility study with Colin.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, I'm Colin Rowan. I'm a Deputy Director at MCDD, and I run the Levee Ready Columbia program. Levee Ready Columbia is a multi-party, multi-agency stakeholder group that has come together, committing themselves to reinvesting in our region's levee system, making sure that it gets recertified for federal needs for FEMA, as well as stay active in U.S. Army Corps of Engineers programs. Those are our 2 main regulators. And one of those regulators, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, is currently working with MCDD as well as the 3 other drainage districts on a feasibility study. And a feasibility study is basically an assessment of our system to see if there are modifications and modernization needs to bring it up to the next 50 years of performance. And if they find a federal interest in making those investments, they work with us as the non-federal sponsors to actually design and construct those. So I'm just going to give you a quick update on where we are in the process, as well as talk a little bit about specific projects identified in MCDD and adjacent to MCDD that benefit the district. So next slide, please. So the primary goals of this project are really focused on reducing flood damages and reducing threats to life safety. This has been authorized through Congress through what's called a storm supplemental. And that storm supplemental funding came through Congress after Harvey, Irma, and Maria hurricanes, where Congress said we need to really look proactively at projects that have high risk behind levee systems and look at ways that we can modernize those to reduce those risks in the future. And so that's how we were funded. It's a 3-year, $3 million study that's fully funded by the federal government. And the other important thing in those feasibility study goals are really looking at ways to increase resiliency as well as reliability of the system. So not only looking at the primary levees that are along the Columbia River and along the Columbia Slough, but also looking at our cross levees that separate the different districts, but because our system really functions as one system, those cross levees increase reliability. Just want to quickly go over how the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as us as levee operators, look at performance of a levee and really to identify how to make those investments that are needed. And so flood risk can be explained as being the probability or likelihood of floods multiplied by those consequences. And so that's exactly what the Corps took a look at. They did analysis that took a look at what likely flood scenarios for the Columbia River Basin will be in the next 50 years. And then they took a really in-depth look at what those consequences would be, economic as well as social and people's livelihoods and lives behind the levees. And so what the consequences would be of failure of the levees. And that's how they developed their alternatives. Please go to the next slide. So this process it's a federal process, and so there's a bit of bureaucracy that's required, especially because it's it's the whole country that's investing in the system if they do find a federal interest in it. And so we've been going through this process and learning a lot, and really have to thank the Army Corps of Engineers and especially the Portland District team of the Army Corps of Engineers that have been working with us. We are about 2/3 through the process. We started in October of 2018. A massive amount of work went into getting us to what's called the tentatively selected plan, which was published in January of 2020. I think many of you may have had an opportunity to take a look at that. Perhaps you provided comment during the public comment period in January. After that public comment period, the Corps sort of went back. They took a look at the comments that they received from the public, comments they received from their agency partners, as well as review from internal to the Corps throughout the country. And they went back and went through its basically, they call it an optimization process, where they really refine what those initial proposals were. And that's where we are right now. On October 28th, the Corps provided an update to the community. Perhaps some of you were able to attend that. At the end, I have a link to where you can access both the presentation by the Corps and MCDD staff, as well as an actual recording of that presentation if you want to listen to the finer details that aren't in the presentation. So now the Corps is working towards finalizing all those refinements, getting additional concurrence from their different agency partners that they consult with, such as National Marine Fisheries and Department of Fish and Wildlife. And then they also are working with the non-federal sponsors, including the MCDD board, to get approval to submit the final recommended plan in April of 2021 to Corps headquarters. It's been some time at Corps headquarters, and hopefully it is positively received, and we get what's called a signed chief's report, which basically allows us to go into the next steps in this process. So that ends our feasibility study phase. Then hopefully we'll be designated for a 2-year design phase, where they move it from about a 30% design all the way up to something that's fully constructible. And then the most optimistic but hopeful timeline for any of this construction would be beginning in 2025. So we're at the beginning of a long process, but it has been going well, and we've definitely been able to identify projects that would really benefit our systems. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to spend a little time. I think I just have a couple of slides for projects that are specific to MCDD, and then I will talk a little bit about some of the projects that benefit MCDD that are just adjacent. So the largest project that is taking place in MCDD, and I'm sorry I didn't provide you a reference map, but what you're looking at is a cross levee that is just to the west of Northeast 33rd. So basically the far northwest corner of MCDD. So you're looking at the top where it says previous alignment. That white box is over Columbia Edgewater Golf Course. So you're thinking right near Northeast 33rd and Marine Drive, just to give you a little bit of an idea. So that cross levee separates MCDD from the district just to the west, which is Peninsula Drainage District number 2. And that cross levee is too narrow and it's also too steep. And so what the Army Corps of Engineers identified was the need to bolster that levee. And why that's so important, going back to that reliability and redundancy goal that I noted. If there's any issue with failures over to the west and Pen 1, Peninsula Drainage District number 1, or Peninsula Drainage District number 2, this allows it to be sort of sequestered into that area and better controlled. And likewise, if there's other issues to the east of that cross levee, it keeps some of the residential properties to the west safer. So it does allow a certain level of reliability and redundancy, but it also just makes it a much more functional system. The biggest difference that happened between the tentatively selected plan, which came out in January, and the refinements, is that the Corps did identify a new design. Instead of using a 4/1 slope, which is a more gradual slope, they're able to use a 3/1 slope. It's slightly steeper, and then at the toe of the levee, they actually use a filter that allows it to be steeper and still just as safe. That's really important because that cross levee goes right along some public and private properties, so it requires less real estate and impacts to those property owners, and it's also less of an environmental impact, the less disturbance that needs to be done. So next slide, please. The other project on the levee alignment that was identified is actually a small low spot that just that image that is on the upper left-hand corner there. That's the Gleason boat ramp, Broughton Beach area. The multi-use path, if you've ever been on the bike path where it crosses from the south side to the north side of Marine Drive, you can actually just look right there and you can kind of see where the levee sort of drops down to get over there. That needs to be raised slightly in that blue bounding box. That might be a little bit tricky to see. That area will be raised and provide a higher level of protection, and that actually allows it to be what they call a uniform level of protection for throughout the system. So I'm just going to note a couple other things that benefit MCDD. The Corps also looked at pump station and overall pump station capacity. Even though they're largely focused on external flood threats, it's really important for the function of the levee to be able to move water. And so they have identified the need to add redundant power to all of the pump stations that pump to the exterior. So that remains a part of this recommended plan. They also have recommended adding trash rakes. That's what Bill was just talking about, that we're currently adding to one of our pump stations. They recommend adding trash rakes to our other big pump station on the east side, which is right just to the east of 185th and Marine Drive. There's a large pump station there we call Pump Station 4. And so adding trash rakes there. And then they're also recommending adding some pumping capacity to one of our pump stations that drains a significant basin that includes area that is adjacent to the levees. And so increasing pumping capacity there. A much smaller version of what Bill had mentioned about replacing the pumps in Pump Station 1, but that will allow that area to be better drained and the levees will be safer there. In just to the west of MCDD is Penn 2. And so that is a largely residential district. And so the Corps has identified the need to raise the levees throughout both of the drainage districts that are just to the west. And so that will provide what's called a uniform level of protection and be better prepared for future floods. And again, that really helps MCDD and it helps our whole system to function as a system by having less risk to that downstream end. We know from the 1948 Vanport flood that if a breach happens in those downstream areas, it often leads to breaches moving eastward. And so that's what we want to prevent. And then just to the east of MCDD, you'll see a number of projects that are recommended right by the cross levee that separates MCDD from SDIC. So that in SDIC is Sandy Drainage Improvement Company, and there is a section of levee that needs to be bolstered as well as the replacement of a pump station. So all these things, again, benefit the system working as one and benefits MCDD by reducing the risk both to the east and west. So thank you very much for your time. On the next slide, Karin, please go to the next slide. This is where you can access that recording and the slides. Thank you very much.
Great. And then before Peggy runs out our staff presentations, I neglected to introduce our board members at the top of the meeting. And so if board members don't mind me putting them on the spot, I can just walk through and you can introduce yourselves, and the other landowners in attendance can maybe put some faces to names. Mike, you want to start?
Hello, I'm Mike Wells. I am the chair of the Board of Supervisors and have been on the board for about 8 years now. Thank you.
Great. Corky?
I'm Corky Collier, also on the MCDD board.
Perfect. Nikki?
I'm Nikki Schultz, I'm MCD board member, and I'm a resident of the Interlochen community.
Great. Nancy?
Hi, I'm Nancy Hendrickson. I work for the city of Portland, and for many years I was the Columbia Slough watershed manager there. I have been on the board for 1 term.
And then Ken.
Hi there, I'm Ken Anderton. I work for the Port. I lead the Port's real estate development team, and I think I've been on the board about 1.5 years, kind of a partial term.
Awesome, thank you. Peggy, you could take it away.
Thank you. You stole my thunder. I was going to do that. I felt it needed to get done. So I'm Peggy Yates. I'm the MCDD Executive Director, and I want to thank the board for it's an all-volunteer board, and I appreciate their work and dedication over my tenure. And also wanted to kind of give an appreciation for the staff who works very hard all the way through the year. As you see, we've managed our financial situation. And also our operations staff is working diligently, as you see, on maintaining and operating our system and actually working on some of the installations of our capital projects. And as you see, we also have this overlay of the feasibility study with the Army Corps of Engineers, and it provides an opportunity for us to move into the future. Next slide, please. And one of the things I want to add in moving into the future is last legislative session in 2019, with the support and emphasis of our Levee Ready Columbia group, as well as our public and private partners, and MCDD and the 3 other drainage districts, work to pass a what is now called the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District. The legislature recognized, and I think Colin did an excellent job in identifying that we really do, MCDD is one district, but it is part of an overall system. And this system has checks and balances and provides redundancy to protect everyone that's behind the levee and moving water to keep from flooding. One of the things that is also important through this legislature is the state really recognized the not only the statewide importance of the land that is protected by this system, but also recognized it as a regional level and state, excuse me. And that this system is instrumental in protecting significant residential, commercial, and industrial land, and is also protects our transportation hubs, which include our air transport with the Port of Portland and Troutdale Airport, as well as 3 major interstates, and also the rail system that comes through. And so it's a recognition that this is probably one of the most important pieces of infrastructure in the state of Oregon. Also, this legislation represents and the legislature recognized the significant community and cultural history that has gone on in our community. We've had 6 major floods in the last 100 years, and many people are well aware of the 1948 Vanport flood, and recognizing it and making sure that this does not happen again. Keep it in our history and in our culture, and that the beauty of establishing this district is to allow us to have a mechanism that is more modern in nature, as we have, as was indicated by Emily, we currently have voting process of landowners, and moving us into a situation where we can have a more current methodology for governance. And also provided many tools for us to help fund this modernization process we are looking at through the core and other mechanisms. And so we truly appreciate that work and appreciate this legislation. Next slide, please. One of the things to help people differentiate the districts we currently, MCDD currently has a very clear mission, which is focused on flood risk management, protecting people and land, and to respond to flood emergencies. It's a very specific mission. The new district that is established has expanded and has new mandates on top of those current district mandates, which is to improve environmental process, which is improved water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, floodplain restoration, and landscape resiliency, bringing more environmentally friendly approach, and also to help us and think clearly about the impacts of climate change and preparing for that. It's also expanded it to include addressing equity and social justice in our community and representing all of the people that are behind these levees and protecting, and also to not ignore, as I said a few minutes ago, not ignoring our cultural history and what that represents. Next slide, please. Current district boundaries, as you see, are laid out and outlined in red. We have Pen 1, Pen 2, MCDD, which is why we're here tonight, and SDIC. Those are the 4 drainage districts that make up the system that we're talking about. You will see in blue that represents the watershed boundary, where much of the water is coming from to move into the system, and then an outline of our existing of the boundaries outlined by this new legislation, which that boundary represents everything within the urban district of Multnomah County. So it's a larger group. It's looking at an ability for people that are getting benefits from the system, that they are also paying into the system. Next slide, please. The difference too in helping people kind of differentiate the districts in this new urban district is, as we're gathered here today, I don't mean to sound like the local church, but we're gathered here today to address, we wanted to go through the process of electing landowners electing board members. We do not have a quorum, but that is the process, as Emily referred to, an antiquated system, but it is our system that we work within. The new district kind of has two separate components. I'll talk a little bit about the process in a minute, but the initial district, which came together for the first time in May of this year, represents 13 elected members. Those members are elected by the appropriate public jurisdictions that are identified, and then there are 5 governor appointees. That district has been stood up and is working through a process. This is one of the first new government entities in the state of Oregon for almost 50 years. It takes a while to set up a new form of government. We are in that process and have initiated it to allow them to set up the government itself and then start to develop and evaluate a revenue stream to help support this district long-term, this new district. And then there will be a permanent board that will follow up once that revenue structure is up and running. Next slide, please. This is kind of final. I'm trying to bring a little bit of the pieces together that we've talked about tonight. As you can see, the top of the slide recognizes years, our timeline, and then the 3 major components that we talked about today, which was 1, we're talking about MCDD, then how that initial board comes in, and also to kind of fold in the Corps of Engineers feasibility study that we also talked about. And you'll see with MCDD, we will continue our operations and maintenance and we will continue the same functions and elect our elect members to the board through landowner meetings, through what we anticipate is 2025. You see that black line that goes vertically, and just after the 2025 mark. And so that's an estimated time, maybe sooner, maybe slipping a little bit, but that gives us an idea. As you see, the initial Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, and if you say it 3 times, you will be tongue-tied, is that that organization, as I said, started up in May, and it is going through the administrative contract policy issues that are necessary to form this new government, and then we'll be moving into that revenue development process, and we anticipate that taking a while. And that, if you jump down 2 lines and you see that new revenue structure in place, that revenue structure needs to be in place for 6 months before a permanent board is elected for that new district. That permanent board is anticipated in May of 2025. And at that point in time, that permanent board will call for the dissolution of the current Columbia Corridor drainage districts. If you jump back up to the MCDD, you will see after 2025 that there is a dissolution process. The districts may decide they have up to a year to dissolve and be absorbed into the new district, or they may decide that day to do it. That we will find out in time. As you see, we have that the Army Corps of Engineers efforts going on. At the same time, we are considering, as we go through our normal operations and setting up the new district, and as Colin indicated, the feasibility study will be finalized through the Corps. It's anticipated in October of 21 when we get the chief's report. At that point in time, as Colin also indicated, we will go into the process of fine-tuning and doing more engineering and design, which gets us from a 30% to almost 100% of design. And that process will go on. And then there may be a little bit of a gap as we work through through the Corps and our congressional delegation to seek to get this approved and authorized for construction funding. And we anticipate that to probably happen closer to middle to end of 25. Next slide. I think I'm done. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Peggy. And all of the presenters, we are going to go ahead and jump into questions and new business section of the agenda today. So we encourage any landowners or representatives to raise their hand so we can call on you. In the participant column, if you cannot find it, you can chime in if you are able to unmute yourself. Are there any questions or announcements from participants on the call today?
Hi, my name is Mike Chandler. I'm a landowner in Fairview. And unfortunately, I joined a little bit late. I'm actually traveling for business right now, but I'm curious how this is going to affect the tax base for property taxes.
And Mark, are you speaking to the transition that was just presented about the new district?
I'm assuming yes. Again, I joined late, so I didn't catch the early part of the conversation. I only caught the parts involving the creation of this new entity.
I can take a stab at this, Karen. One of the things currently, individuals are paying for the work that's done by the district through assessments of their land. With the new district, what will be done is evaluating a number of mechanisms. One could be a rate versus, but it will not be a tax. It will likely be a rate or a fee for service and what services individuals receive within the district and outside the current districts.
And how will that be assessed? Is that part of our property taxes? I mean, the fee is tax, right?
The current assessments come out with your property tax bill, but we anticipate that the new fees that will be developed in the future will likely go out with your utility bills. It won't be a tax per se, it will be a fee for service.
Okay, but there's no opt-in or opt-out. It's if you live within that district, you're going to be paying. I mean, it's not an opt-in or opt-out option, right?
We don't anticipate that it will. If you are receiving benefits that from the services provided, you will be paying.
So does that mean whatever is being assessed on our property taxes will stop, and then the new fees will start.
That is correct. We won't be, there will be no double dipping.
So will it be similar to what we're paying right now?
We haven't gotten to that point, but the new board was established and are sitting down to evaluate what that will look like. That is always a goal, but we have to evaluate what the services are and what people are receiving.
Okay.
And they haven't started that process. They're just initiating that now.
Mike, the only addition I would make is I'm going to be posting a link here in the chat for everybody.
So
That includes. Sorry, it's.
To understand correctly that it's going from a.
Mike, we're having a little trouble hearing you. We just lost you.
I've been hitting the tap to speak button and then jumping off, so there's no background noise here.
Will you please ask your question again? We didn't hear your question.
So as so you're going to an election, I'm sorry, an actual board instead of volunteers is what I'm understanding, right?
Ultimately, when the new district has begun to collect revenues, there will be a board, there will be election of board members, correct? But it will still have 4 governor appointees on that permanent board.
And those are paid out of the state budget, I'm assuming?
The governor appointees?
Yes.
They're volunteers.
They are. Okay, so the board will remain a non-paid board. Am I understanding that correctly?
I'm not going to give you an exact answer. I anticipate that it will not be a paid board, but I don't have that answer at this point in time as I go through this process.
I think as a property owner, my main question is how it's going to affect the bottom line for the homeowner.
And we fully understand that and are very sensitive to that.
And Mike,
So
one addition I wanted to mention as well as the board. So the initial board has just started meeting this summer, and the meeting recordings are currently meeting monthly, as Peggy mentioned earlier, and all the meeting recordings are also available online. But some of the questions you're asking are also a place where would be appropriate for you to either attend those meetings or watch those meeting recordings, as those decisions are currently being worked through. And I've just posted that link for the new district meeting dates and meeting recordings on the chat.
And I'd like to add one other thing, Mike. There is going to be significant outreach into the community as this new initial board goes through its process. So there will be plenty of time and opportunities to weigh in as we move forward. And that board clearly wants that assistance and involvement by the community.
And this is Corky Collier. I'll chime in also that feel free to contact those of us on the current MCDD board to talk about this more, give you some background on why this all started back with, actually goes back to Hurricane Katrina, really. So I'd be glad to sit down and talk to you some more about that as well. And I'll try and put some contact information in the chat.
Yeah, and I think, I'm fairly new to the Fairview district, and I'm about a 3-minute walk to the Chinook Landing area. So it's always a concern for us in my neighborhood as to if we have another major flood, how that's going to affect us. So I'm not against the changes here. I think most of my neighbors are going to be concerned about, again, the bottom line, how it's going to affect them, and that there's transparency in that bottom line, basically.
I'd like to chime in just quickly. My name is Nikki Schultz. I'm on the board. I'm one of your neighbors. I live over in Interlaken. I'm a homeowner. And I just want to mention that one of the primary drivers for the change is not only are we trying to better operate and maintain this system of the 4 drainage districts, but we're also trying to get costs under control. I mean, currently they're fine, but we have a lot more requirements as we need to modernize our levee system. And those costs, the benefits of those improvements are reaped by folks who don't necessarily own property in the floodplain, right? It's people using the airport, it's people driving along I-84, right? There's other people that are reaping the benefits. And so we're trying to develop a system where the costs are not just borne by those of us who own property in the district. So our hope is that this system is controlling costs for all of us, right? That's the goal. And there has been looked into what someone that owns a house out here in the east end of the district, what those costs might be in the future. And the early projections, we don't know what's going to happen, but those early projections were there's not much change for us, right? It's still going to be down in the, we're paying in the tens of dollars a year for this.
Understood. And again, I'm new to this process, so I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around this. And many of my neighbors are retired and on limited budgets and probably aren't even aware of this process. And so I guess a follow-on question would be, how are you educating? I understand the meeting here, but how are you getting the word out to the homeowners?
There's been several meetings that have been targeted to homeowners out in this area. The Interlaken Neighborhood Association has hosted meetings, as well as City of Fairview has hosted meetings that have been advertised. So if you're new to the community, you, especially given that we've been in the pandemic operating a little bit differently, you might not have encountered one of those, but watch out for notifications from the drainage districts. We have had community meetings.
Who are affected by this? Sure. Okay. And again, a lot of my neighbors, they're in their 70s, 80s, fixed incomes, and probably aren't internet savvy. So are there other methods of getting the word out?
And yeah, I can answer that. So historically, especially for these meetings, we actually conducted door-to-door outreach. We had our field staff and a couple of our administrative staff go door-to-door to promote the meeting and share information about the agenda. Due to COVID-19 protocols this year and to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and ensure the safety of our staff, we did not do that door-to-door outreach, which was aimed in particular for people who may not have internet access and might need to tune in on the phone. So we look forward to thinking of creative alternatives depending on how long the pandemic continues to pose a barrier for us. But we are gravely, concerned and prioritize those populations so they can participate. Mike, just because I have had another participant in the meeting with their hand up for a few minutes, I'm going to jump over. Just want to encourage you, Corky Collier, who is currently the representative for MCDD on the new district, the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District. Board has included his email. So he'd be happy to answer any questions that you have as well. But I just want to make sure we get to a couple other questions. So John, you currently have your hand up if you have any questions.
You bet. My question is, a number of us living along the slough are dealing with issues of dumping and homelessness. Now, currently, myself and my neighbors are playing the role of cleanup and of reporting on your property. What is it that Multnomah County Drainage District can help participate? For example, up till recently, you've had 2 dismantled cars within a half mile of your office one is still currently there and the other one has been removed after multiple reporting. Are you guys actively involved in the cleanup from what is going on?
That doesn't lie within our jurisdiction. Those are city, county, and private property owners. We have been working closely and are continuing to work closely with the city with the recognition that anything that could impact our system will impact the community as a whole. So we are doing that. And we have actually gotten, we've called at one point, Karen, at the city to notify them of those situations and keep them apprised.
But if these are on Multnomah County drainage property per Portland maps, the actual dumping areas are literally on the edge of your area there. How is that affected? Because is the walking path along Elrod not yours? There's literally a car dismantled on that walking path.
So this is Bill Owen, the chief engineer. Let me answer that particular question. That path that you reference is very close to our office, but it turns out that's in the public right of way, at least the version that I remember seeing, and I've walked up to that car a couple of times that you referenced. Recently, if it's the same site that I'm thinking of, sir, that's in the public right of way. So we work with PBOT at the city of Portland, and their crews eventually cleaned up that site and removed that vehicle. So if you drive by there now, that vehicle has been removed. It took a little bit of time for that to happen, but eventually did. Our property, at least near Elrod Drive, is really at the very end of that road, and it consists of that parking lot that one may park in if you end up wanting to walk the levee or go boating, either on the lower slough or the upper slough. And that area is an area we maintain as part of our property. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Bill. Are you guys actively involved in reporting when you see these things?
We are. There are several, our operations team, Cadrin and myself are all active in doing so. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of effort to get things moving, depending on how the city is approaching the homeless population at the time.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, John and Bill and Peggotty, for your answers as well. Are there any other questions or announcements from participants in the meeting?
So this is Mike again from Fairview. So what's the next steps from our perspective?
Mike, are you referencing how you can participate or stay engaged for the new district?
Yeah, I would I'm not sure of the question because I don't have my head around the entire process here, but obviously you're presenting this new change in the board structure. So what is expected from us as homeowners within the district to, like, what's the next step? We obviously need to vote on something, or again, I'm very new to the process and I've been out of town for quite a while here. So I'm just trying to get my head around as to what role do we have as homeowners in this process?
So I would like to just start first by, since you weren't able to join us for the beginning of the meeting, do want to clarify our quorum requirements. So currently, with our current statute, and I'm just trying to go back a couple of slides, we will, by statute, be required to hold another annual landowner meeting in May of next year. And so currently these were the seats that we mentioned earlier in the meeting are currently open for election. So I can let Emily chime in a little bit more on the details, but we encourage you to participate in that upcoming landowner meeting. We also encourage you to sign up for our email address. And if you check so in your registration, I will automatically include you. So that'll send you notifications for meetings like these. And always encourage you to check in mcdd.org and the calendar. This is where we post all of our upcoming board meetings where you can join us and ask these questions of your Board of Supervisors. And you can also watch any recordings of meetings online. But Emily, would you want to clarify next steps from this meeting?
No, and I think that covers it. And then additionally, the process going forward in that transition to the new district, that new district board is meeting now and really being briefed and getting up to speed on the work of our current districts and that transition timeline. And so they are, as Peggy mentioned, getting to work on like setting sort of that foundation for the transition and how those rates will look and how that district will look. So I think there's not a vote at this time until that new district is set up. Then the landowners and property owners in that district will be more involved in like elections and moving forward. So I would just encourage anyone that has interest to start getting involved at that level with those board meetings just now as they're setting those things up and establishing how that will look. They're getting started on the work that will like more formally set up the new district. Right now it's in a transition phase.
And I'd like to add one other thing, and that is, Mike, that this new board is starting to focus on establishing their mission, vision, values, and anticipate going out to the public to talk about those in the future. I would anticipate it's maybe going to be closer to the first quarter of 21, calendar year 21. But as Karen mentioned, keeping an eye, or Emily mentioned, keeping an eye on our webpage to give you an idea, but we will also be doing outreach through that process and keeping people informed because we want the community to weigh in as we begin this process of a new district.
That's helpful. Thank you. I also work at the airport, so I'm involved with the Port of Portland at some level, and so I will do that. I'll go in and get information and pass it on to people that I work with and people who are affected by this.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
And Vicki, this is Kit Anderton with the Port of Portland as well. I'm happy to do a one-on-one with you as well and give you the rundown.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Mike, I am posting the link in the chat for the meeting calendar so you can see all of our upcoming board meetings on here. When we have community meetings as well, some of the ones that Nikki mentioned earlier tonight that happen through Interlochen or the Fairview neighborhood associations, we also post these here. So we just encourage you to take a look, and we will send notifications as well. But this is a really great resource.
Okay, thank you very much.
Of course. I do see a question from David and Helen wanting to know of an update of the silting problem of Fairview Lake. That was brought up 2 years ago, and not sure if David or Helen, you'd like to expand a little bit on that question.
Yes, this is something that in one end of the lake, the west end, it's been silting up quite a bit. And from what I understand, this is a relatively new problem over the past few years. In the past, I understood there was something done that cleaned things out, and wondering if that's anything that's in the works.
Sunny, are you on? Sunny may be able to speak to some previous research and some like of the past practices on this.
Yeah. So I don't know, I can't remember offhand how long ago it was, but we did do, hold on. Sorry
we have
about
to have those moments.
Screaming children in the background. We did do dredging many years ago on the lake, and we have talked to the Fairview homeowners, like Fairview Lake Homeowners Association about it. And basically over the years, with regulations regarding dredging and disposal of sediment or material in water material, it's become very cost prohibitive to do this type of work. So we've talked to Bob Dolphin a lot, one of the active members with that group. And so we're happy to have some further discussions or provide background information that we provided to the Fairview Lake Owners Association about this. But basically we determined the project is just, it was too cost prohibitive to move forward with it.
Thanks for the input.
Karen, you're muted.
Thank you. I was just reading a question off the chat from John. How much of the $920 a year is being spent on diversity issues as mentioned earlier? How is race an issue related to MCDD? John, could I ask for clarification on the $920 a year figure you've posted here?
Yes, $920 is what I pay per year. And it was brought up that diversity is an effort of the MCDD related to a coverage. And I'm not sure how race or some outreach is related to what any of us are. I mean, other than this video chat, no one knows what race anybody is. How is that outreach or any expenditures related to it relevant to what it is you do?
It's a great question. So what we can share currently, the board has supported an effort to develop a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. This is a result of wanting to conduct a deeper analysis of the populations that we serve. So some of the issues that you identified earlier, John, such as people who don't have internet access or may have different disabilities. We also have a history of segregation within the community. So there were people, and there was a people in the Vanport flood that were affected. And that was a majority a white population, but there were also several people of color. So it is important for the MCDD district to invest in helping staff understand this history and also be able to understand some of the historical and cultural significance of the area in order to develop outreach that works for the populations that we serve. We have, for example, NAYA, the Native American Youth and Family Center, also located in the MCDD district. And so the funding has allowed us to gain a deeper analysis of those communities' needs in order to make our programming and our outreach more effective. Does this answer your question?
I mean, I can see that's the political move right now. I just don't see how floods have anything to do with race in that way. You know, they're not choosing, all of us are basically paying into it. So I'm not sure how it would have anything to do with the services provided or the costs associated with it or the burden related to each of us who've chosen to live within the area affected by the MCDD. But I mean, my question doesn't really have anything further.
I just like to add one other thing, which I think is important, is it's not just the outreach. This is Peggy Yates, and it's also recognizing that the more diverse our workforce is within MCDD, the broader and more, you get a broader perspective and a more complete approach to how to manage issues, not only internally, but externally. It has been proved that the more diverse the workforce is within an organization, the more effective that organization is internally, as well as working outside into the public. And that's the other reason MCDD has, and the board has recommended this approach.
Okay, I have one question from Steve Mondero regarding board structure for the new district. Steve?
Yes, thank you. Steve Mondero here. I am a property owner here in Fairview as well. Are you hearing me clearly?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. You know, one of the things I've noted here, and it was kind of news to me with this restructuring of the drainage district into what appears to be a consolidation of the 4 districts into one. If I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong on that assumption. But,
that is correct.
Okay. But I duly noted that we're coming from essentially 18 representatives on the existing board down to half of that, about 9. Explain the rationale for that, please.
I'm going to have a 2-part response to that. The first is the initial board, which is formed now, and I anticipate being in place for until 2025, is made up of 17 members, and our current districts make up our district boards make up 17 members, and it is a cross section and represents all of the public agencies and jurisdictions within the district, within the area. And then second of all, the more permanent board, the permanent board that will be elected in 2025, that is a smaller board, but that is elected by the public. So everyone will have an opportunity to make a selection and vote on that member, on those members.
Question, Peggy, on that note. If that's going to be elected by the public, what jurisdiction is that public going to include?
Public will include the area in which the I think one of the positions and somebody else may want to step in because I don't have the legislation clearly in my mind, but the four of the elected members is within the floodplain, the managed floodplain, as you see up on the slide on the permanent. Thank you for putting that up there because I forgot. And it could be a resident, business owner, or a designee of a business owner, and one resident of the urban area within Multnomah County, within the urban growth boundary of Multnomah County. And then there will be 4 government appointees. Who will not be elected, they'll be appointed by the governor.
Is that by whom will they be appointed, Peggotty?
Pardon?
Which entity will be making those appointments? The governor themselves?
The governor makes those appointments. Yes, correct.
Okay, so that's pretty much out of the hands of any individual who is living within the drainage district of which they're going to be represented by. My question is that, when we look at, I'm very much in favor of autonomy. And as these things start to dwindle down with the number of representatives that are available within a jurisdiction, that fewer voices get heard. That also being said, I heard comments about outreach, and having been a resident in the Fairview area and adjacent to Fairview Lake, I find that information is rarely disseminated to my household or any of the people within my association, of which I am a member.
Oh, I'm sorry you have not received. We continue to do outreach. We will make note of your comment. And as far as the 4 governor appointees, just like the 5 governor appointees on the initial board, I anticipate that those would be individuals within the urban growth boundary that would make you signed a letter of interest to the governor, and the governor makes those selection. And so it will be part of all of our responsibility to make sure that individuals that represent flood safety, environmental justice, environmental conservation, and the other person would be within the jurisdiction. Just like the ones that are currently the 5 governor appointees we have on the initial board.
Thank you, Peggotty.
You're welcome.
And so this is Karen, and I do recognize and really appreciate landowner comments regarding outreach. Within our 100-year history, we have had full-time community relations or external relations members for about 5 years. And so we are really, this is why it's so important for you to participate, to elevate these concerns to us, and to ensure that we have your contact information to promote ongoing outreach efforts. So I am always happy to hear any ideas that communities have. Myself and Evan Mitchell, she's my colleague, works on the feasibility study and is doing a lot of work with this new district on communications. And we're always thinking of ways to promote this information, disseminate it to people who have different access abilities. And then we also are trying to build our database of, the different landowners in the district and the issues that they care most about. So I just encourage, if anybody has a community group, we can come and present and answer more questions in more detail, and always welcome ideas of how we can best serve your needs and make sure you're getting the information that you need to participate. Thank you. Any other landowner meeting questions or announcements?
I see Jim Theta has his hand up.
Thank you, Emily. Jim?
Yeah, hello. My name is Jim Theta, and I own property along Whitaker Way. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. A couple of real quick questions. First of all, is there a governor appointee on the existing board?
No, the existing board, to be eligible, you have to own property in the drainage district or be an authorized representative of a land owning entity or person. And so everyone on the drainage district board now currently represents property or a property owner in the drainage district. There's no governor appointees.
I'm just wondering why it was necessary to have that many governor appointees on the board.
Hi, this is Colin Rowan. I can talk briefly about why that was identified. And if you take a look at the 13 elected members of that initial board, they represent agencies in large part, the different public agencies that are existing and own either jurisdictionally or own land within the drainage districts. And so they each had a representative, and the discussion was how to have better representation of the different types of landowners as well as other stakeholders within the drainage district. So it was recognized the need to elevate the voices of residents, business owners, nonprofits, as well as some in the environmental justice and environmental conservation community. And so because the state legislature was creating this new district, it was recognized to better connect it of statewide interest and import to have the governor make those appointees. And that was carried over into the discussions around the permanent board. So we wanted to make sure that there was an increase in sort of the democracy of actually voting people in. Currently, it's only landowners or their designees that are able to be on the board. And so if you rent property that's within the drainage districts, you can't be on the board. This increases that representation, but there was also the need to have a certain level of expertise, and the best way, again, connecting it to the legislation was having governor nominees, appointees. So people basically asking to be nominated, putting in a letter of interest, describing why they're an expert in flood safety, environmental justice, or environmental conservation. And so, yep, that was the continuation and making sure there was a balance of both interested people that wanted to work with the board, as well as a certain level of expertise that was necessary to run the district. Thank you.
Okay, and I appreciate that explanation. It just seems like 4 representatives from the governor seems to be an awful lot. The governor would have lots of other things to be interested in. But anyway, okay, moving along. The major question is the homeless issue around Costco on 138th and on the levee along Marine Drive on the Columbia River side. Do you actually control the land on the Columbia River side, say between the 205 bridge and Troutdale, because there's a lot of homeless activity there? Is that something that you take care of, or is that somebody else's responsibility?
So this is Bill Owen again with MCDD. Let me start with a response, and I think Conrad would be able to supplement my my comments here. There's no question that the homeless activity has affected our operations. The area you reference, Mr. Theta, actually is owned by a number of property owners. None of it is owned by MCDD. So we have relationships and partnerships with those property owners to maintain the levee system there. to mow grasses, to make sure the levee prism stays intact. But to do that, we have to have access to the levee. And so on occasion, that's challenged when there's other folks in the way or there are camps in the way. And so we have done some work with our other property owners, with the property owners themselves, as well as the city and the county to gain that access. But we've taken a couple extra steps to help make sure that the homeless population there understand what we're all about, what services are available, and options potentially for them to move along. Cadrin, can you expand upon that?
Yeah, I think, Bill, you've provided, excuse me, a good description of our work. So the district has a limited jurisdiction, so we really can have very little control over the situation. We do, as Bill mentioned, see it affecting our operations, and we've tried to take a proactive approach through partnerships. Those partnerships include partnering with the city of Portland and using their one point of contact tool online. If you are able, I can post this tool online as well. If you look at that website, you'll actually be able to find a weekly report that the city authorizes of areas where they anticipate cleaning up. A lot of the areas that are listed in here are areas that we have elevated as concerns because of operations within the district. So that has been a really important partnership for us. There's also a lot of Portland Parks property, so we work closely with Parks and Rec. And then there's the Port of Portland. So a lot of the areas, as Bill mentioned, around the Marine Drive levee are Port of Portland property. So we work with their facilities manager. And when needed, we work with the Sheriff's Department if our outreach efforts with Cascadia Behavioral Health aren't proven effective, to ask people to move in order to conduct our operations. As you can imagine, with COVID-19, the situation has been exacerbated. So there is a formal policy where there's limitations on where people can be moved. So we're doing our best to work with our partners and trying to address the issues in priority. Does this answer your question, Jim?
Well, it really does come close. Like, what about the issues, very simply put, pollution in the slough? There's a lot of homeless people living along the edges of the slough, and of course with the resulting pollution. Now, the district doesn't really own any of that land, so to speak.
Jim, this is Bill Owen again. Your last statement is correct. For the most part, we do not own any land under the water or adjacent on the banks. And so we have easements to allow us to access those areas that are not publicly owned. The pollution issue is real, as you well know. We've had to bulk up on our personal protection equipment to make sure our staff is safe. Quite honestly, the way we deal with a lot of the pollution is that water eventually gets down to our pump stations. And so we have methods there, barriers there that stop the pollution that's floating on the surface, at least. And then we scoop that up and dispose of it into the proper locations. But it's a hazard for our staff. But there are ways for us to deal with that. We are not going out to specific sites at this point to try to clean up large areas of debris. We will use some of the sources that Cadrin referenced earlier to identify and hopefully get help from the city or the county.
Okay. Well, it's a difficult issue, and I appreciate the efforts that you have done, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. don't currently see any other questions in the chat. If anybody would like to speak up with any questions or announcements, we have about 10 minutes remaining.
So this is Mike again from Fairview. Just a question back on the board issue and the makeup of the board. Are these equal voting members on the board? So it's 4 to 5, community 5, governor appointed 4. So is this a equal voting, or is there a board president that's makes the final decision appointed by the governor?
That's an excellent question. And all members of these boards, including the governor appointees, have a voting role.
Is that an equal voting role?
Yes.
Okay, that answered my question. Thank you.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hi, John, we can hear you.
Oh, all right. So I'm new to this technology. So along Marine Drive, what do you want to do with that? Are you going to raise it or do channels, or what's going to happen there?
Hi, John. This is Colin Rowan. I believe is this a question related to the feasibility study, or I guess just overall levee capital projects?
Levee project from east of Portland Yacht Club. What are you planning there?
So that's a great question. Thank you. So east of Portland Yacht Club, there is a section of Marine Drive, basically from Portland Yacht Club over to kind of right in front of Columbia Edgewater Golf Club, where there used to be the golf club on the north side of Marine Drive. That section of levee is too low, and so the Army Corps of Engineers has identified the need to raise that. It sort of undulates, it rolls a little bit there, but roughly it needs to be raised about 1.5 feet, more or less. And so what they'll be doing is actually doing a levee raise, which Marine Drive throughout the system is generally on top of the federally authorized levee. And then they'll actually raise the road surface. Think of it as raising the road roughly, 1 foot to 2 feet, depending on if it's a low spot.
So the properties that the houses are on are above that level. Does that make a difference?
Yes, that's a great point. There's a number of houses. Some of them are on the center line of the levee. Some of it is moved over near Marine Drive. And you'll see there's a number of cuts that basically lower the effectiveness of the levee that are right next to the home. So a lot of people, you can see if you just look at where their retaining walls or where the buildings are, each one of those is really, think of that as a perforation of the levee where water can come in. So we will not be, the Corps is not recommending doing anything to those properties that would really wreak havoc to try to basically shore up all of those sections or to do anything else to kind of preserve those properties and those homeowners' needs. The easiest way to do it that is also highly effective is to actually raise Marine Drive, and that way we actually have a uniform level of protection.
How high would you want to raise Marine Drive?
So it depends. So Marine Drive is being recommended to be raised just along from Portland Yacht Club, about 1/2 mile to the east. So ending right in front of the golf course entrance. That in general, you can say it needs about 1.5 feet of being raised on average. So it sort of rolls a little bit. And when you drive on that, you can kind of see how it has high and low points.
Okay. So let's, so how are the property owners along that area be affected?
So there'll definitely be temporary construction, you know, a nuisance. So they'll be able to sequence. They're not just going to tear up that whole section of Marine Drive. So while we're still about 5 years away from any kind of construction, we'll definitely need to plan that out in a way. And things that they have done in other places, such out on Sauvie Island where they needed to do it, they're able to do it in small sections or basically one side at a time. So either having detours or able to basically have sort of one-way traffic. So people will still be able to access their homes. There will definitely be some temporary you know, delays as far as traffic delays to get that construction done. But it is necessary for that uniform level of protection for flood safety.
So some of these property owners have cut-throughs for driveways. What's going to happen to that?
So those will remain. The levee itself is actually just to the south of those areas. So a lot of those homes, so the levee itself, you know, it's not as clearly defined as when you're, say, on top of the levee just to the north of Portland International Airport, where it's very, very clear that both sides are the levee. So it actually moves a bit, but all of those kind of retaining walls and driveway and access areas, those will all remain.
But Marine Drive's going to raise a couple feet?
Yeah, you know, averages, I think, about 1.5 feet. I can definitely check in on what that is. But yes, so it Marine Drive will raise. And I think the best way to do it, you can even do it at home using Google Maps. If you just drop that little yellow guy to do a street view at some of those homes, you can see that you know, where the driveway cuts are, where the homes are, it's almost like small little hillocks along there. And so what the Corps and, you know, us as a levee operator need is predictability. We want uniformity so that we know that those areas aren't concerns, as opposed to having to do spot checks at 50 different locations. And so you'll have uniformity there, but if you take a look at it, they'll basically be able to just kind of even it out. And actually, Karin, would you go back to the slide that it's a faint blue outline, so I apologize that it's difficult to see. But you can actually see in the schematic that the Corps has updated. One more, or, oh no, I'm sorry, it's in the pen. I'm sorry, that's actually not in this presentation. So I apologize for that. The link, and maybe Karin, if you could go down 2 more slides, please.
1 second, I'm just trying to skip to it so I don't make people dizzy going back and forth.
So there is a link to the presentation that the Corps gave. And in that presentation, there's a really good schematic of exactly what they're proposing for that section that you're talking about on Marine Drive. And you'll kind of see where that area spreads a little bit. And this was actually coordinated with the Portland Bureau of Transportation. And they see that as a good opportunity to build in some of the multi-use and bike paths that are needed to complete the 40-mile loop.
Sorry, Colin, are you able to see that?
No, I don't see anything. Okay.
One moment. Did that work? Okay,
Well,
Colin,
It
is this the image you were referencing or
no,
no?
I'm sorry. No, I said, noted that it actually is not in this presentation. It's an N2 presentation. I was just asking for the, just one more slide down. Yes, so that at that link right there, you can actually go and see the presentation that the Corps did for what's recommended right along Marine Drive there in Peninsula Drainage District number 2.
And John, I will post this in the chat for you as well, so you can have a quick reference to this. Are there any other questions or announcements? We are at 8 o'clock. So I want to respect everybody's time. We'll have time for one more
What's their chat?
announcement or question.
What is their chat?
You
Oh,
type
oh,
it in.
there's their chat. Or how much?
And John, this is Kat, and I will also send you an email with this since I have your email information, as well as everybody. But since we are at 8 o'clock, I do want to give any of the board members or Peggy some closing words. But first of all, just want to say thank you so much to everybody for attending tonight, for all of your really great questions. There's a lot of new initiatives, new efforts, all really aimed at providing a better service for you. And so we hope that you learned a lot, and we'll be following up with a recording of this presentation in the next 2 weeks, as well as any questions in written form that we address this evening. So thank you again so much. And I will hand it over to Peggy.
I just want to thank everyone for participating and asking really great questions. As our staff has also provided a lot of different links and resources for getting us communicating more openly. So please feel free to follow up with those connections, and looking forward to working with you. So, thank you.
Okay, so she should send me something.
Oh yeah, I think it's.
On behalf of the board, thank you for attending, and particularly for your patience with this new format that we had to use because of COVID. And we look forward to our next landowner meeting in person. Good evening.
Thanks for y'all's time.